They say a lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth even gets its boots on, but in our case, a single lie was about to buy us a $450,000 ticket straight to heaven or hell, depending on who you asked. It all started in our cramped, salt-aired living room in Malibu, where the three of us, Chloe, Liam, and myself, Olivia, were staring at a mixing board like it was a ticking time bomb. We were a songwriting trio, a band, a chosen family living on borrowed time in a house Chloe's uncle was about to sell, meaning our rent-free summer was officially dead. To make matters worse, a major record label had just fell in love with our demo, but they wanted a full, professional mix, which would cost us at least $30,000 to $40,000. We had exactly $0, unless you counted the tip jar from my waitressing shifts at the local diner where I spent my mornings serving $5 black coffees to tourists. Liam was pulling 80-hour weeks making cheesy booby trap sound effects for a weird neighbor's video game startup, and Chloe was enduring her screaming boss at a Hollywood rock label, yet we were still light years away from our dream. Just as the panic was setting in like a heavy marine layer over the Pacific Coast Highway, I returned from a disastrous family reunion in Ohio with my own personal catastrophe. My high school ex-boyfriend, Oscar, had cornered me in front of my entire family, proposing with a giant diamond that felt more like a pair of handcuffs, and in a moment of pure, unadulterated panic to escape the endless cycle of baby showers, diapers, and backyard barbecues, I blurted out the biggest lie of my life. I told my mother I was already engaged to someone else. Back in Malibu, when I confessed my sins, Chloe's eyes didn't flash with judgment. Instead, they lit up with a terrifying, brilliant spark. She had just learned that our family trust fund, a massive nest egg created by our great-grandmother's inheritance from a historic prophylactic fortune, would pay out a staggering $450,000 to any female descendant who got married to a man. The catch was simple. It had to be a guy, and it had to happen fast. That was when Chloe looked at me, then looked at Liam, who was casually eating a slice of cold pizza on our 300-square-foot deck. 2 brides, 1 groom, and a mountain of cash that could buy our house, fund our album, and guarantee we'd never have to work for a jerk again. It was a purely transactional business move, a perfect legal loophole with a strict set of platonic boundaries that we swore would keep our real lives completely untouched. We didn't realize that the second we agreed to share 1 ring, 1 husband, and 1 massive lie, those safe, comfortable lines we'd drawn over 10 years of friendship were going to blur into something far more dangerous. The morning after our grand conspiracy was born, the California sunshine felt less like a warm embrace and more like a harsh interrogation spotlight. We sat around our scratched wooden kitchen table, which measured exactly 3 feet by 5 feet, with a single yellow legal pad between us to write down the official rules of engagement. Liam was clutching his mug of black coffee like it was a lifeline, his messy brown hair sticking up in every direction as he stared at the words Chloe had scrawled at the top of the page, the temporary marital boundary agreement. Rule number 1 was absolute and non-negotiable. This was a business transaction, meaning absolutely no romance, no physical intimacy, and no catching feelings. We agreed to divide the $450,000 into 3 equal shares of $150,000 each, which would instantly solve all of our financial nightmares. Liam could finally quit his mind-numbing job creating video game explosions for our strange neighbor. Chloe could tell her demanding record label boss where to shove his coffee orders. And we could finally rent a professional recording studio in downtown Los Angeles to mix our 10-song demo. But as I watched Liam sign his name at the bottom of the yellow paper, my chest tightened with a familiar, heavy ache that had nothing to do with stage fright. The truth was, Liam and I had a history that neither of us ever talked about anymore. We had dated for 3 turbulent months during our freshman year of music school before he made a colossal mistake with a sophomore vocalist, leaving my 19-year-old heart completely shattered. We had spent the last 6 years, 2 months, and 3 days rebuilding our friendship into something stable, pretending the past was buried 10 feet under the Pacific Ocean. But now I was about to walk down a fake aisle with the only man who had ever truly broken me. The reality of our gamble hit us faster than a Malibu high tide when Chloe's phone buzzed on the counter with an incoming call from her mother, Sandy. Her voice was so loud and ecstatic we could hear it from 3 feet away, demanding to know every single detail about the sudden elopement and insisting on flying out to California immediately with a trunk full of family heirlooms and a giant brisket. Panic erupted in our small living room as we realized Sandy's arrival meant we had less than 48 hours to turn our platonic roommate sanctuary into a convincing love nest. Liam and Chloe had to hastily move his clothes into her bedroom, hiding every trace of our separate lives, while I had to figure out how to play the supportive maid of honor who was totally fine with her best friend marrying her secret ex-boyfriend. To make our wild story believable to the outside world, we had to take our first terrifying step into the lie by heading to a local jewelry store on the boardwalk to buy matching silver wedding bands, splitting the expensive cost across 3 maxed-out credit cards while the sweet old jeweler gushed about how we made the most beautiful, unconventional family she had ever seen. Sandy did not just arrive at our front door. She swept in like a Category 5 hurricane of maternal enthusiasm and scented hairspray, dragging a 20-pound cooler of frozen brisket behind her. The moment she crossed the threshold of our 95-degree Malibu house, she threw her arms around Chloe and Liam, sobbing about how she always knew their beautiful friendship would blossom into holy matrimony. I stood in the corner of the kitchen, clutching a dish towel like a shield, trying to plaster on a smile that did not feel like it was cracking my face in half. The dramatic irony was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Sandy was weeping with joy over a union that was completely funded by a prophylactic fortune, while the real husband-to-be was secretly trying to catch my eye over her shoulder. To make the scene believable, Liam had to wrap his arm around Chloe's waist, pulling her close in a gesture that was supposed to look like domestic bliss, but looked to me like a painful reminder of the way he used to hold me during our freshman year of college. The forced proximity of this tiny house was already suffocating us, but it got 10 times worse when Sandy insisted on seeing their bedroom to bless their marriage bed with a hand-woven quilt she had carried all the way from Chicago. Chloe and Liam's room, which was barely 12 feet by 12 feet, had been hastily staged with Liam's beat-up leather boots and flannel shirts thrown into Chloe's closet, but we had forgotten one critical detail. A framed photograph of Liam and me laughing on the beach during our brief 3-month relationship was still sitting on his nightstand, which Chloe had frantically shoved under the bed just as Sandy walked in. My heart was hammering at 1,000,000 beats per minute as Sandy began inspecting the room, asking why there was only one pillow on the bed and demanding to know why Liam looked so pale and sweaty. Liam, trying to save the day, blurted out that he was just overwhelmed by how lucky he was, squeezing Chloe's hand while his eyes darted toward the floorboards where our secret past lay buried. The tension in that small space was a physical weight, a constant push and pull between the roles we had agreed to play and the raw, unresolved emotions that were bubbling to the surface. Just as Sandy was about to ask why the maid of honor was staring so intently at the closet door, the doorbell rang, shattering the awkward silence. Standing on our porch was Harper, the gorgeous, sun-kissed yoga instructor Chloe had been hopelessly flirting with at the local studio for the past 2 weeks. Holding a basket of organic peaches and looking completely confused by the massive banner Sandy had hung over the garage that read, "Congratulations, Chloe and Liam." Our perfect, multi-thousand-dollar lie was suddenly staring down a head-on collision with reality, and we were only 3 hours into the weekend. The silence on the porch was so heavy you could hear the distant crash of the Malibu waves, each one sounding like a countdown to our inevitable doom. Harper stood there, her wide green eyes darting from the bright pink glittery banner hanging over our garage to Chloe, who looked like she had just been caught smuggling contraband across the border. Sandy, completely oblivious to the sudden drop in atmospheric pressure, pushed past Chloe with a massive wooden spoon in hand, her face beaming with pure Midwestern pride. Sandy immediately welcomed Harper, introducing herself as the mother of the bride and gushing about how her beautiful daughter was marrying the most wonderful Irish Catholic boy in all of California. My heart stopped, and I could feel Liam beside me freeze up so hard he practically stopped breathing. Chloe's brain must have been operating at supersonic speed because she immediately laughed, a high-pitched, manic sound, and told Sandy that Harper was actually her personal trainer who was helping her prepare for a grueling triathlon. Then, turning back to Harper with a desperate, silent plea in her eyes, Chloe spun a wild lie about how the banner was just a terrible, running inside joke created by our dorky bandmates to mock her and Liam because they spent too much time together. It was a masterclass in panic-induced acting, but the tension was so thick it felt like walking through wet cement. To make matters worse, Sandy insisted that Harper stay for lunch to try her famous slow-cooked brisket, which she claimed could heal any broken soul. The forced proximity of our tiny kitchen became an absolute pressure cooker. We were all crammed around the small wooden table, our shoulders brushing, our knees bumping under the tight space. I was squeezed directly next to Liam, and when his thigh accidentally pressed against mine, a jolt of electricity shot straight up my spine, dragging up every single memory of the freshman year winter we had spent wrapped in blankets on a freezing dormitory floor. I pulled away quickly, but the push and pull of our unspoken past was screaming in my ears. Meanwhile, Chloe was sweating through her linen shirt, trying to play the part of a blushing bride-to-be for Sandy while sending frantic, longing looks across the table to Harper, who was quietly eating her vegan salad and looking increasingly suspicious of the bizarre family dynamic unfolding in front of her. Just when I thought we might actually survive the afternoon without anyone calling the police or the local newspaper, Sandy reached over and grabbed Liam's hand, demanding to see the wedding rings we had bought on the boardwalk. Liam had to slip the silver band out of his pocket, but as he did, his grip slipped, and the shiny ring rolled across the hardwood floor, stopping right at the tip of Harper's leather sandal. As the small silver band wobbled to a standstill against Harper's left sandal, the room went so quiet you could hear the hum of our 30-year-old refrigerator from 10 feet away. Harper slowly looked down at the gleaming metal, then looked up at Liam, who was already on his knees, scrambling across the floor like a frantic golden retriever. He snatched the ring with a nervous chuckle, claiming his hands were incredibly sweaty from the heat of Sandy's heavy brisket. I watched Chloe's knuckles turn completely white as she gripped the edge of the kitchen table, her eyes darting between Harper's suspicious gaze and her mother's radiant, clueless smile. Sandy immediately clapped her hands together, demanding that Liam place the ring on Chloe's finger right then and there so she could see how the silver looked against her skin. My stomach did a violent flip. According to our strict temporary marital agreement, there was supposed to be no public displays of affection, but the forced proximity of this tiny room was pushing us to the absolute edge. Liam hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes flashing toward me with a desperate, silent apology that made my heart ache with the memory of how he used to slide his hands into mine when we were teenagers. Then he took Chloe's hand and slid the ring onto her finger. The sight of it sent a cold, sharp spike of jealousy straight through my chest, even though I knew every single bit of this was a total sham for $450,000. Harper watched the exchange with her head tilted, her sharp green eyes narrowing as she pointed out that it was quite unusual for a newly engaged couple to have their maid of honor living in the exact same house and sitting so closely that our knees were practically glued together under the table. To break the suffocating tension, I quickly blurted out that I was actually in the process of moving out to my friend Steven's apartment in downtown Los Angeles, which was a flat-out lie but seemed to satisfy Sandy, who immediately began talking about how we could use her heavy minivan to transport my boxes. As the lunch finally wound down, Chloe practically pushed Harper out the front door under the pretense of showing her a rare succulent on our deck, desperate to explain away the madness before Harper walked out of her life forever. That left me alone in the kitchen with Liam and Sandy, who had decided it was the perfect time to start washing the greasy baking pans. Standing at the sink, with the hot water steaming up our small kitchen, Liam's shoulder brushed against mine as he reached for a dish towel, and for one terrifying moment, the pretend world we had built felt altogether too real. When Sandy turned her back to put a platter in the cupboard, Liam whispered that he was so sorry. his warm breath tickling my ear and sending a shiver down my spine that reminded me how easily our carefully constructed boundaries could crumble under the weight of our unspoken past. His apology hung in the humid air of the kitchen, smelling faintly of lemon dish soap and charred brisket, a sudden warmth that made the 90-degree Malibu heat feel almost cold in comparison. I squeezed the dish towel in my hands, trying to ignore the way my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Liam was standing less than 12 inches away from me in our tiny kitchen, his shoulder brushing mine as he reached for another greasy baking pan, his eyes reflecting a deep, familiar regret that I had spent the last 6 years, 2 months, and 3 days trying to forget. I turned my head away, desperate to maintain the boundaries of our temporary marital agreement, and told him in a harsh whisper that we did not have time for apologies because we had a $450,000 lie to protect. Before he could respond, Sandy marched back into the kitchen, her floral blouse smelling of strong lavender perfume, holding a giant binder filled with wedding planning pages that she had secretly smuggled in her oversized suitcase. She was talking at 80 miles per hour about table arrangements, flower centerpieces, and whether we should serve wild salmon or prime rib at the reception, completely oblivious to the silent emotional warfare raging right in front of her. Just then, Chloe slid through the sliding glass door from the deck, her face as pale as a ghost and her eyes red-rimmed as if she had been holding back tears. She told us in a flat, hollow voice that Harper had decided to leave early because she had to prepare for her advanced yoga class at 10 o'clock the next morning. But the absolute panic in Chloe's eyes told me that their conversation on the deck had gone horribly wrong. Sandy did not even notice her daughter's distress, immediately grabbing Chloe's arm and dragging her toward the living room couch to look at silver-embossed invitation samples. That left Liam and me standing by the sink, the forced proximity of the kitchen making every breath feel heavy. Liam looked at me, his jaw clenched, and asked how we were going to survive the next 48 hours with Sandy in our house without spilling the truth. I looked at the silver band on his finger, the very ring we had split across 3 credit cards, and realized that our simple, business-only plan was turning into a quicksand that was dragging us all under. Every touch, every forced smile, and every lie we told Sandy was acting like a magnet, pulling Liam and me back to the freshman year winter we had tried so hard to bury, and the terrifying truth was that I did not know if I had the strength to push him away again. Before Liam could say another word, the loud voice of Sandy drifted from the living room, declaring that she had some wonderful news. She marched back into the kitchen, her eyes sparkling with excitement, as she informed us that her hotel reservation in Santa Monica had been pushed back by 24 hours due to a massive plumbing emergency. Therefore, she happily announced, she would be staying right here with her favorite newlyweds in our cozy Malibu home for the night. The news hit us like a bucket of ice water. According to our elaborate cover story, I was supposed to be moving out to the apartment of Steven in downtown Los Angeles to make room for the happy couple, which meant I now had to pack a suitcase immediately to keep the illusion alive. The eyes of Liam widened in sheer panic, and he immediately offered to help me carry my heavy boxes down the narrow hallway to my bedroom. The moment we stepped into my room, which measured barely 80 square feet and smelled of vanilla candles, the weight of our shared history rushed back to fill the quiet space. Liam closed the wooden door behind us, shutting out the sound of Sandy humming a wedding march in the living room, and the sudden isolation made my breath hitch in my throat. We were standing so close in the small gap between my bed and my desk that I could see the golden flecks in his hazel eyes and the slight tremble in his fingers as he reached for a cardboard box. He whispered that he was incredibly sorry for the mess we were in, and that he hated seeing me forced out of my own home because of a wild lie that we had created together. I looked at him, feeling the painful tug of the invisible string that had connected us since our freshman year of music school, a constant push and pull of emotions that we had tried so hard to bury. I told him that I did not need his pity, and that we needed to focus on the $450,000 that would save our band and our future. But as we both reached for the same roll of packing tape, our hands brushed, and a spark of raw, undeniable electricity flared between us. We froze, staring at each other in the dim light of the afternoon sun, both of us fully aware that the boundaries we had written on that yellow legal pad were nothing but a fragile paper shield against a raging fire. We could hear Sandy laughing outside, her cheerful chatter acting as a constant reminder of the high stakes of our game. The forced proximity of this tiny bedroom was breaking me down, and as Liam stepped a fraction of an inch closer, his gaze dropping to my lips, I realized that the hardest part of this multi-thousand-dollar scheme was not lying to Sandy, but pretending that I did not want him to kiss me. Just as Liam's gaze dropped to my lips and the tiny space between us seemed to evaporate completely, a sharp, heavy knock on my bedroom door shattered the spell. We both leaped backward, our hearts hammering so loudly I was certain Sandy could hear them through the thin drywall. Chloe stepped into the room, her eyes wide with a frantic mixture of desperation and exhaustion, whispering that her mother was already setting up a sewing machine in the living room and was demanding to see the specific cardboard boxes I was taking to my new apartment in downtown Los Angeles. I drew a deep, shaky breath, trying to steady my voice as I grabbed my heavy canvas duffel bag and told Chloe that I was ready to play my part. Liam reached down and picked up my heavy suitcase, his knuckles white against the worn leather handle, his jaw set in a tight, frustrated line that told me he was just as affected by that near miss as I was. We marched down the narrow hallway like soldiers heading into battle, stepping into the bright, suffocating light of our small living room. Sandy was there, happily folding a mountain of floral fabric, and she immediately gasped at the sight of us, declaring that Liam was such a chivalrous gentleman for helping his new sister-in-law pack her entire life into the back of a sedan. The dramatic irony of her words sliced through me like a razor blade. She was praising him for being a supportive family member while he was legally married to her daughter and almost kissing me in the very next room. We carried my bags out to the driveway, where the late afternoon Malibu sun was beating down on the cracked concrete, making the air smell of heated rubber and salt water. As Liam popped the trunk of my old car and lifted the heavy suitcase inside, our eyes met again, and the unspoken tension between us felt heavier than the 40-pound bag. He stepped closer, shielded from the living room window by the open trunk lid, and whispered that he absolutely hated this plan, that he hated making me leave our home, and that we needed to talk the moment Sandy went back to Chicago. I gripped the side of the car, my fingers digging into the warm metal, and told him that there was absolutely nothing to talk about because we had a $450,000 record deal to think about, and our personal lives did not matter anymore. I climbed into the driver's seat, turned the ignition, and watched Liam fade in my rearview mirror as I drove away from my own home, leaving my best friends to live in a lie that I had helped create. The drive down the Pacific Coast Highway was lonely, the cold ocean breeze doing nothing to cool the warmth that still lingered on my skin from where his fingers had touched mine. The hum of traffic on Broadway was a harsh contrast to the rhythmic, soothing crash of the Malibu surf I had left behind. Stephen's apartment was a tiny, sixth-floor loft in downtown Los Angeles, measuring barely 500 square feet, with exposed brick walls and a window that overlooked a neon-lit parking lot. I threw my heavy canvas duffel bag onto his mismatched corduroy couch and tried to breathe, but the air felt thick with city exhaust and the lingering scent of Liam's jacket. Stephen, being the saint that he was, did not ask any questions. He simply handed me a mug of hot chamomile tea and left me alone with my acoustic guitar. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, strumming random chords, but every melody I tried to write sounded like a mournful echo of the song Liam and I had worked on during our freshman year of music school. My fingers traced the cold wooden neck of the guitar, and my mind kept drifting back to the narrow hallway of our beach house, to the warmth of his breath on my ear, and to the sheer panic in his hazel eyes when he realized I was actually leaving. My cellular phone buzzed on the nightstand, interrupting the silence with a string of frantic text messages from Chloe. She was sending me pictures of Sandy's massive planning binder, complaining that her mother was currently trying to measure her finger for a vintage family heirloom ring that was valued at over $10,000. Chloe was completely losing her mind, trapped in the forced proximity of the beach house with Sandy and Liam, playing the role of the ecstatic bride while her heart was aching for Harper, who had completely stopped answering her phone calls. I stared at the glowing screen, feeling a toxic mixture of guilt and jealousy. I was supposed to be the supportive best friend, the maid of honor who was helping them secure the $450,000 that would save our band, but instead, I was hiding in a concrete jungle because I could not bear to see the man I loved pretend to belong to someone else. Just as I was about to turn my phone off and attempt to sleep, the screen lit up again, but this time it was not Chloe. It was a voicemail from Liam, recorded at 11 o'clock at night. His voice was low and raspy, accompanied by the distant sound of the ocean wind on our Malibu deck. He said he was standing outside, looking at the empty space where my car usually parked, and that the house felt completely lifeless without me. He whispered that he could not stop thinking about what had almost happened in my bedroom before I left, and that the silver wedding band on his finger felt like a heavy iron shackle because it did not belong to the right girl. His words sent a wave of heat straight to my chest, shattering the fragile walls I had built to protect myself, and I realized that our high-stakes gamble was no longer just a business deal. It was a slow-motion train wreck that was about to pull all of us under. And I did not know how much longer we could keep up the facade before the truth destroyed everything we had spent years building. The sound of Liam's voice vibrating through my phone speaker at midnight was enough to make the cold concrete walls of Stephen's downtown loft feel like they were closing in on me. I must have replayed that voicemail 10 times, staring out the 6th-floor window at the flashing red neon sign of a parking garage 3 blocks away, my heart doing double time with every word. He had sounded so tired, so undone, and so utterly unlike the careful, platonic roommate he had pretended to be for the last several days. Just as I was about to finally force myself to delete the recording and throw my phone across the room, a sudden, sharp buzz from the building intercom downstairs made me jump. My breath caught in my throat as I crept over to the wall monitor and pressed the button, only to see Liam's face on the grainy black and white screen, his jacket collar turned up against the chilly midnight air of downtown Los Angeles. He had driven 35 miles from Malibu in the middle of the night, down the empty lanes of the Pacific Coast Highway, just to stand on my doorstep. When I unlocked the door of the 500-square-foot loft, he was standing there, smelling of salt water and cheap gas station coffee, his eyes dark with an intensity that made my knees feel weak. He stepped inside without a word, the heavy wooden door clicking shut behind him, trapping us together in a space so small that his warm breath brushed my forehead. He told me he could not stay in that beach house for another second with Sandy planning a fake life for him and Chloe, and that every single room felt like an empty tomb without my voice. The forced proximity of the cramped kitchen corner was suffocating. My back was pressed against the cold laminate countertop, and Liam was standing so close I could feel the heat radiating from his chest. He reached out, his hand hesitating in the air before his fingers gently brushed a stray lock of hair away from my face, his touch so warm it felt like a brand. I tried to pull back, desperately reminding him of our strict temporary marital agreement, of the $450,000 on the line, and of Chloe, who was currently drowning in her own lies in Malibu. But Liam just shook his head, his fingers sliding down to cut my jaw, his thumb tracing my lower lip as he whispered that he did not care about the trust fund or the record label anymore if it meant losing me all over again. The emotional push and pull of our 6-year history was screaming between us, a beautiful, torturous tension that made me want to scream and run into his arms at the exact same time. We were standing on the absolute edge of a cliff, both of us knowing that a single kiss would shatter our massive lie and ruin our bandmates' dreams forever, yet as his lips hovered just an inch above mine, the rest of the world simply ceased to exist. The space between his lips and mine vanished in a heartbeat, and with it went every single rule, boundary, and logical defense I had spent 6 long years constructing. When his mouth finally met mine, it was not the polite, careful touch of a roommate, but a desperate, starving confession that broke through all our elaborate walls. The kiss tasted faintly of sweet chamomile tea and the salty midnight air of the Pacific Coast Highway, a rush of familiar warmth that swept me straight back to our freshman year of music school when he was my entire world. My hands, which had been clenched tightly against the cold laminate kitchen counter, found their way up to his chest, gripping the fabric of his flannel shirt as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning universe. For one glorious, terrifying minute, there was no $450,000 family trust, no fake marriage to Chloe, and no looming threat of her mother Sandy discovering our massive lie. There was only the rhythmic thud of his heart against my palm and the absolute certainty that we had crossed a line from which we could never return. Liam pulled me closer, his arms wrapping around my waist as if he were trying to weld our separate lives back into one, and a soft, helpless sigh escaped my throat. But just as the warmth threatened to consume us completely, the sharp, electronic chime of my cellular phone shattered the silence of Stephen's loft like a gunshot. We broke apart instantly, both of us gasping for air, our eyes wide with shock and a sudden, freezing guilt as we stared at each other in the dim light of the kitchen. My trembling fingers reached for the phone on the counter, the screen flashing with Chloe's name, her caller ID glowing brightly in the dark room. I pressed the phone to my ear, my voice shaking as I whispered a hello, only to be met with her frantic, hyperventilating breath on the other end of the line. Chloe sobbed that we had a massive emergency in Malibu because Sandy had gone through the trash to find some scraps for her slow-cooked brisket and had instead found our crumpled, signed temporary marital boundary agreement sitting right on top of the bin. To make matters even worse, Sandy had already called a family meeting in the living room and was currently sitting on the couch with a glass of water, demanding that Chloe and Liam explain why their sacred marriage was governed by a set of strict, platonic business clauses. The cold splash of reality hit us like an icy wave, and as I looked up at Liam, his hazel eyes filled with absolute dread under the neon glow of the window, I realized that our perfect, multi-thousand-dollar scheme was officially dead in the water before the first dollar could even be spent. The sound of Chloe's frantic voice screaming through the receiver was like a bucket of dry ice poured straight down my spine, instantly freezing the warm, electric haze that had enveloped Liam and me only seconds before. I stared at Liam, his hand still resting on my cheek, his hazel eyes wide with a cold, paralyzing dread as he listened to his fake wife describe the absolute destruction of our $450,000 house of cards. We did not even have time to process the lingering warmth of our forbidden kiss before we were running out the door of Stephen's downtown Los Angeles loft, leaving the neon lights behind as we raced toward my old sedan. The 35-mile drive back to Malibu down the darkened lanes of the Pacific Coast Highway was a blur of high-speed panic and suffocating silence, the engine of my car roaring as I pushed the speed limit while Liam stared out the passenger window, his knuckles white as he gripped the dashboard. Every single mile felt like a mile closer to our execution. The dramatic irony of our situation twisting like a knife in my stomach, because the very document we had written to protect our platonic friendship had now become the smoking gun that would destroy us. When we finally pulled into the cracked concrete driveway of the Malibu beach house, the yellow headlights of my car illuminated the living room window, where Sandy's massive silhouette was pacing back and forth behind the thin curtains. We crept through the front door, the heavy ocean breeze whipping our hair, and walked straight into a scene of absolute devastation. Chloe was sitting on the edge of the worn corduroy couch, her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, terrified sobs, while Sandy stood in the center of the room like an angry judge, clutching the crumpled yellow legal pad in her trembling hand. The air in the tiny house was so thick with tension it felt like walking through deep water as Sandy slowly turned her sharp gaze toward Liam and me, her face red with a mixture of betrayal and confusion. She slapped the yellow paper down onto the glass coffee table with a loud crack, demanding to know why her daughter's sacred marriage was governed by a set of strict, platonic business clauses that forbade any physical contact or genuine affection. Sandy's voice was shaking as she pointed a finger at Liam, asking how he could look her in the eye and pretend to be a loving husband while signing a contract that treated her daughter like a corporate business partner. I stood frozen by the entryway, the forced proximity of the small living room pinning me to the wall as Liam stepped forward, his voice cracking as he tried to construct a desperate, last-minute lie to save our dreams, but the look of pure, Heartbroken disappointment on Sandy's face made us all realize that the game was officially over. The silence that followed Sandy's confrontation in our small Malibu living room was so loud it made the roar of the ocean outside feel like a distant whisper. Seeing the sheer disappointment in Sandy's eyes, the weight of our elaborate web of lies became too heavy to carry, and the truth came rushing out of us like a broken dam. Chloe confessed everything, explaining how the 90-year-old Rothman Family Trust Fund and the $450,000 prophylactic fortune had tempted us into this madness just to save our songwriting dreams. I stepped forward and admitted my own panic about the proposal from my high school boyfriend Oscar, while Liam confessed his absolute love for our music and his desperate desire to keep our band together. Sandy sat on our faded couch for several long minutes, her hands clasped tightly around the crumpled yellow legal pad before a soft, understanding smile replaced her anger, realizing that our desperate scheme was born out of love for our art and each other. She told us she was not angry about the money, but she was heartbroken that we felt we had to hide our struggles from the family. Although our elaborate fake wedding plan was officially dead and we immediately returned the silver bands to the boardwalk jeweler, our true salvation came from a completely unexpected direction. The major record label had finally finished reviewing our raw 10-song demo, and the executive was so blown away by our harmonies and Liam's production that they bypassed our need for an expensive studio mix altogether, offering us a real contract with a massive upfront advance. We did not need the fake inheritance anymore because our music had finally earned us our freedom. With our dreams secured, the real healing began in our little beach house. Chloe drove all the way to the yoga studio to apologize to Harper, promising her that the only thing she wanted was a real, honest relationship, which Harper accepted with a beautiful, sun-kissed smile. That left Liam and me standing on our breezy wooden deck at sunset, watching the golden light paint the Malibu sky in shades of pink and orange. Liam slipped a simple, delicate ring out of his pocket, not the expensive silver band from our credit card gamble, but a beautiful vintage copper ring he had found at a local flea market. He looked at me with an intensity that made the past 6 years of running feel like a blink of an eye, and he asked me to marry him for real this time, with no rules, no fake contracts, and absolutely no boundaries. As I slid my hand into his and whispered yes, I realized that we had finally found our way back to the music we were always meant to write together.